Welcome to Christian Books Club, and today I'm going to talk about um, chapter 7. It's called Power Hungry Opposers: The View from Secular Social Justice Activities, and the book is called When Culture Hates: Preserving Christian Views, and this is chapter 7. Halfway through, halfway through the chapter. So, power hungry opposers. So, good news, we all agree on something, that there are relatively few statements that that garner there are relatively few statements that near universal argument in our increasingly polarizing culture. So there are a lot of injustices in the world, and humans have a responsibility to do something about it. So justice, therefore, is an interesting topic because you don't have to convince most people that it matters. So, for example, an atheist asked on a website, if there are gods, why is this world so full of pain? So almost 100 people offered a reply, and not one challenged that the underlying assumption of the question, that the world is indeed full of injustice. Everyone simply offered different explanations for that presumed reality. So I'm going to read a comment, well, not a comment, but basically a comment. Basically, an atheist commented, and that's what they said. And 3 points, I'm going to talk about their comments, what it means. So, God does not exist. We are all the inevitable consequences of an expanding universe where physical laws construct the simplest constitutes of matter into a vast cosmic web. Pain, misery, and suffering are integrally woven into the fabric of life, but they can be greatly minimized. Injustice can be done away with. Maybe it is now within our reach that we can create our own divine purpose in cultivating, build a better world, a moral world with fairness for all without the need for religion, a world where each person has the right to diminish, misery and suffering, a world where paradise is not just pie in the sky. So, not some of those assumptions in this comment. So, number one, number one, many injustices exist. So, there's always injustices in the world, and it will always happen. It will always exist no matter what place you go. Injustices will always happen. Number two, many of those injustices don't have to exist because humans have the ability to make things better. And number three, human lives matter. On those 3 points, the Bible would agree. The Bible would agree that human lives matter because every human is made in the image of God, and that God cares about the just functioning of societies. Consider a few other verses to emphasize the important justice is to God. How important justice is to God. Proverbs 31:8-9 says, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are disdained. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." Jeremiah 22:3. Thus says the Lord, do justice and righteousness, and deliver from the hand of the opposer him who has been robbed, and do no wrong or violence to the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place. Micaiah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you to do? Justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe, might, and deal in something, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. Those you ought to have done without neglecting the others. So, defending justice. So, because we disagree on how to define injustice and what to do about it once we define it. So, defining injustice. So, justice is making right that which is wrong. So, how is justice? Is making right that which is wrong. And right and wrong are moral categories requiring a standard. So, justice is making right that which is wrong, and right and wrong are moral categories that are standards. So, imagine for a moment that you pour 1,000 puzzle pieces onto a table. When you take a wooden yardstick and lay it horizontally to the middle of the pieces, separating them into groups above and below the stick, you call the group above the stick to the right pieces and the group below the stick the wrong pieces. With the location of the stick serving as a standard for determining which pieces are right and wrong, believing that the wrong pieces below the stick need to be fixed in some way, you get to work righting the wrongs of the puzzle table. But let's say someone doesn't like how you did things. They pick up the stick, mix all the pieces together, and then place the stick in a different location. To separate the pieces based on their own preferences. Now there are right and wrong groups again, but they're made up of different pieces. Then, because a different standard was used to separate them, this person too gets to work righting the wrongs of the puzzle table, but the pieces they're trying to fix are different than those the other person was trying to fix. This is a illustration. So that's an illustration of right and wrong, and how it can be changed from right and wrong can be changed to separate, and it depends on the person and how their preferences are of right and wrong. So those two people would use similar vocabulary in saying that pieces are wrong and need to be made right. And they might even both be passionate about the puzzle. So justice is the puzzle. So basically, imagine you put justice pieces on the table. That's the justice puzzle, and you separated the justice puzzle into two right and wrong pieces. But they use a different standard to determine which pieces were right or wrong in the first place. They are working to make different wrongs right. So that's why Christians and secular social justice activities have such divergent views on justice. As Christians, we know God's perfect character is the object standard for determining what is right and wrong. So as Christians, we should know that God's perfect character is how we determine the standard of right and wrong. So we shouldn't define the standard of right and wrong by people, but we need to define the standard of right and wrong based on God. Because He is the only one accurate. He is the only accurate stick. Only His standards should be used to identify the wrongs that should be made right. So only His standards, not other people. So if you feel like you've been wronged and you want to make things right, you don't go to people for advice, but you go to God, because He is the stick that's accurate. So He can direct you on what's right and wrong, so you can have biblical accuracy of what justice is. So, injustice according to Noah. the matrix standards. Matrix, I'm not sure. Matrix standards. So Christians and secular justice activities have different understandings of justice because we use different standards of defining the wrongs that should be made right. So the standards are different compared to, it depends on the person. Like my standards of right and wrong are different than somebody else's right and wrong. So that's an important point to discuss, but we need to go a step further and explore the nature of the standard. The nature of the standard used by culture. So secular social justice thinking is rooted in a philosophy called critical theory. And that's where they get critical race theory. I think that's what, yeah, critical race theory. So that's where that critical race theory comes from, is social justice. So few people outside of the certain academic and activity circles had heard of it. But after the Black Lives Matter, so once Black Lives Matter happened, that critical race theory, a lot of people started to adopt it or to use it for Black Lives Matter. But to use it for exploding into the public in 2020 because of what happened. And then the term critical theory was suddenly propelled into popular level discourse. So the Black Lives Matter became a poster child for what critical theory based socially justice looks like in practice. But despite the fact that most people have now at least heard of the critical theory, few people have a clear understanding of its key concepts and their implications, because it's a vast subject and it's easy to get lost. So, number one, about critical race theory. So how critical theory based justice fundamentally differs from biblical notions of justice. How critical theory's framework leads to cultural outrage toward Christians. Let's see. How critical theory framework leads to cultural outrage towards Christians. So basically, I'm going to talk about a little history. So, critical theory is an academic discipline that grew out of, I'm not sure what that is, Marxism? I think that's the word. In the mid 1800s, argued that all of history had been one long academic class struggle between opposed opposer groups. So the opposed labored to produce goods, while the opposers controlled the means of production. So oppression in this view was the result of problematic social structures. So the only way the opposed could be liberated was for them to gain a consciousness of their social location and the system in a revolution. So the goal of the revolutions would be to create a new political order based on socialist defined notion of equality, equal outcome for all, not equal opportunity for all, equal outcome for all. So socialists define equality as equal outcome for all, not equal opportunity for all. So fast forward to the 1930s. So Marx Bernie way of looking at the world through opposer and opposed, categorized and began it beyond economies. So in the decades followed, that framework was applied by various thinkers to race, gender, and several other identity markers. And then people of color and those in the communities were identified as victims of social structures that kept them opposed by those in power. Those were considered opposed because dominant groups were imposing their norms, values, and expectations on them. And the end result of this analysis is a social binary in which everyone fits into one of the two groups: oppose or opposed, opposer or opposed. So based on the identity markers, any given individual may fall into both opposed and opposed, opposer and opposed groups, depending on their unique mix of identity characters. So for example, I am a white man, so that means I'm opposed in terms of my gender, but I am an opposer in terms of my race. So that's just an example. For example, that's just what it says. For an example, let's see. People experience distinction forms of oppression based on their specific mix of members and opposed groups. So according to this view, a black woman experiences oppression. I think that's the word. Oppression? Yeah. So for example, a black woman experiences oppression at a different level in a different way than someone like someone else, or like me. So a black woman experiences what is that word? Opposition. What is that? OPP. What's another word for that? 1 second. OP. There. Oppression. Gosh, that's the word. I keep forgetting. Or that person experiences oppression, persecution, basically injustice. So oppression. So it's important to understand the form, the critical theory perspective. Individuals don't have to experience anything in particular to be considered opposed. Nor do individuals have to do anything in particular to be considered opposers. The opposer brainy is a social group phenomenon based on presumed power in society. For example, critical theory scholars say that to oppose is to hold down, to press, and deny a social group full access and potential in a potential in a given society. So oppression describes a set of politics practices which function to systematically exploit one social group to the benefit of another social group. Oppression occurs when one group is able to enforce its prejudice, or their discrimination throughout society because it controls the institutions. So from that discussion, we can now identify the specific nature of the difference between biblical justice and critical theory. based justice. In critical theory, the standard for identifying where the injustice of um, oppression lies is the dividing line of the social braining. In other words, identity groups that hold the power in society are by definition pre something pre I don't know what that word is, preference, I don't know, something by definition uh, perpetrators of injustice. And identity groups with less power are by definition victims of injustice. But the only accurate standard for identifying injustice to identify injustice and injustice is God's standard. God's standard isn't based on who does or doesn't hold power in society. It is based on his perfect moral character. So I like that. God's standard is not based on power. God's standard is based on your character, your moral character. Or I mean based on his moral character. So the result is that secular social justice advocates are often working to right injustices that aren't truly injustices because they started with the false standard. So those injustices are not injustices because they started with a false standard. So when Christians work for social outcomes in conflict with those deemed just according to critical theory, we're despised for our oppressive views. So for examples of how this plays out, let's look at two culturally high profile branches of critical theory: critical race theory and the Q word theory. So, for example, one, critical race theory. So, CRT is a branch of critical theory that deals specifically with race-based oppression in society. So, according to white people are the oppressors and people of color are the oppressed. White people use their social privilege and power to impose on everyone else. But whiteness isn't about skin color, as the word might intentionally suggest. Rather, it's about the culture of white people that impose on everyone else. So I like that. It's not about the skin color, it's about the culture that they impose on everybody else. So that's how people should separate. It's not about the skin color, it's about the culture, and sometimes they impose on people, but it's not about skin color. So let's see, and also, so this is just more examples. A nuclear family, an ideal social unit. Judeo, I don't know, I think I've heard of that. Judeo-Christian tradition, Christianity being the norm, Christian religions, stuff like that. So there are so much examples of that stuff. And let's see. But for our current purpose, we'll stick with a single point. So many examples of presumably problematic whiteness are not actually problematic. The issue lies therein is the issue. Critical theory starts from a belief that it's inherently unjust for a dominant group to oppose its norm on minority groups, but never consider whether these norms might be objectively good. It simply problematized whatever is associated with the social group that holds the power. But what if, for example, God's ideal social unit is the nuclear family that would make such a belief in an accurate understanding of reality rather it's held by a dominant social group. So contrary to critical race theory, most basic assumptions are objectively good or bad regardless of who holds them. So from a biblical perspective, racial injustice cannot be identified by the individual line of CRT. Social binary because one group is an opposer or guilty of sin due socially to their skin color. I'm going to read that again. Social binary because no group is an opposer or guilty of sin due solely to their skin color. People are guilty when they transgressions God's moral law. It doesn't matter what their skin color is. So if you break God's moral law, it's not about your skin color, it's not about critical race theory. You've broken God's moral law. So you are guilty of sin, no matter the skin color that you have. Let's see. Let's see. Form the perspective of critical race theory. So why form the perspective of critical race theorists? Christians who reject CRT categories of justice aren't merely wrong in their views. They're compliment in turning a blind eye to what critical race I don't know, some of these words prominates belief is evil racial oppression. Let's see. So you'll be met with grave moral indonations if you suggest that norms can be evaluated on their own objective merits rather than as a function of a group power dynamics. Let's see. Furthermore, the concept of whiteness is closely associated with Christianity itself because Americans' predominantly white European heritage was also predominantly Christian. So this means that many of the norms associated with white people in America are objectively good because they oriented from a Christian worldview, yet they're seen as oppositive because they happen to be associated with Americans' racially dominant group. So, for example, the nuclear family is part of God's objective design for human flourishing, as historically been an American norm given Americans' Christian heritage. However, CRT activists see the nuclear family as something to abolish because of its association with whiteness. Activities acknowledge this quite directly. There's no greater source of systematic oppression than the nuclear family. The nuclear family is associated with whiteness, and whiteness is associated with racism and also white supremacy, which that is a lie. That's definitely not true. Whiteness is not associated with racism. So through the eyes of activists and Christians who reject CRT are guilty of upholding and defending racial injustice and are promoters of problematic whiteness. So if I reject the critical race theory, people are going to call me that I am racially injustice, or that I promote problematic whiteness because I reject critical race theory. But when we stand in the way of those working to tear down, so when I stand in the way of the people who are trying to tear me down, those values and expectations that we know to be good, so advocating for the common good by fighting for the protection of the nuclear family. We're just going to say the Q theory. So I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying that on YouTube. I forget what words will get in trouble for YouTube. Some words do, so I'm trying to remember which ones. So we'll just say the Q theory is a branch of critical theory that deals with gender identity and oppression in society. So according to the Q theory, people are the oppressors and those in the LGBTQ community are the oppressed. So it's just talking about basically it's talking about the LGBTQ community and how they're just being oppressed and stuff like that. I'm just going to read some verses. Genesis 1:23, God created man in his own image, in image of God. He created him, male and female, and he created them. Males and females are to come together in the unity of marriage and join as one flesh. So there's just some verses. So Christians are guilty, or we find that the eyes of the culture, so the eyes of the culture say that Christians are guilty of upholding oppressive norms that perpetuate injustice and harm. So of course the LGBTQ is going to say that Christians are the oppressors because they hold marriage that they think it should be between the man and the woman. So of course, if you say that, they might try to come against you just because that's what you think marriage should be. So the next point is Christianity is life-giving, not oppressive. So we can now apply our understanding to comments from the beginning of the chapter that the questions that I was talking about to make for a case study. So let's see. So in accordance with critical theory that the views held by dominant social groups are inherently oppressive. So why did he suggest the writer wanted a Christianity that secured their privilege and hoarded their power? Because he presumes, in accordance with critical theory, that claims of objective truth are disguised power play by dominant social groups who want to retain their privilege. So why did he claim that biblical views on race and keep marginalized people where they are? So in accordance with critical theory, if you defend, and seek justice in terms other than those corresponding with the standard of social binary, your motives are to keep marginalized social groups down. In doing so, you are allegedly demonstrating that you don't want all groups to be equal, and you don't value diversity because you want to keep benefiting from your dominant groups of social privilege. So you particularly need a specialized something to translate critical theory thinking. So this is just so now I'm going to do, it's just a quick response to 5 popular challenges. So on social justice. So these are 5. Basically, I'm just going to go through the 5, and then I'm going to be done with this chapter. So these are responses to social justice. So number one, Jesus was a social justice warrior. Christians should be too. Question: how do you define social justice? What do you mean by social justice warrior? What are some examples in Scripture that you think demonstrate how Jesus saw social justice in the same sense as you do? Number two, critical theory is just an analytical tool. I don't know, and something tool. So Christians opposing it are overreacting. Question: can you explain what you mean by just an analytic tool? Are you saying that those who adhere to critical theory don't seek action based on critical theory's analysis? Do you believe and something tools are inherently natural, or is it possible that some tools can be led to the wrong social diagnosis and solution? Number three, Christianity is opposed to the LGBTQ community. Question: what do you mean by oppressive or oppressive? That's what oppressive. What do you mean by oppressive? Do you think Christians are oppressive? Biblical teachings are oppressive, or both? Can you share some examples of oppressive Christianity? Number four, Christians who reject CRT ignore systematic racial oppression. What kinds of modern systematic oppression do you have in mind? How do you define CRT? Do you think it's possible to believe examples of systematic racial oppression exist without accepting CRT as the lens through which we should identify and end them? And number five, Christianity as a white man's religion and is therefore oppressive. So, questions: what do you mean by white man's religion? So, what do you mean by white man religion? Do you believe that religions can be true or false? If so, do you believe that the truthfulness or falsehood of any given religion can be determined by its association with any particular group of people? Why or why not? So, actions for common good. So these are the last things I'm going to do, and I'll be done. So, actions for the common good. 7 ways to shine your light through biblical injustice. Number 1, pray for, volunteer with, or donate to Christian organizations dedicated to poverty and disaster relief around the world. Number 2, pray for, volunteer with, or donate to Christian organizations dedicated to eliminating human trafficking and rehabilitating survivors. Number 3, pray for, volunteers with, or donate to Christian organizations fighting religious persecution. Number 4, pray for, volunteer with, or donate to gospel rescue missions. Number 5, provide a home to children temporarily or permanently separated from their family. Number 6, help make it possible for low-income and single-parent families in your church community to choose homeschooling or Christian private schools. And the last one, find out more about and get involved in your church's service opportunities. And that's it. That is the last point of the chapter. So opposers and opposed is yeah. So now just more about what it means to be opposed, and what it means to be the opposing, stuff like that. And injustice is by God's perfect standard, not ours or yours or mine. And God is good all the time, and I'm out.